The alien girl was called ugly until the human soldier married her. This unlikely union began in the chaotic halls of Earth's intergalactic military academy, where species from across the galaxy trained side by side, not always in harmony. Sergeant George Howard's boots echoed against the polished floors as he rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a group of cadets. Their jeers and laughter stopped him in his tracks. In the center of their circle stood a towering figure, iridescent scales shimmering under the harsh academy lights. Multiple eyes blinked rapidly, a clear sign of distress among the Hazari. "Look at the freak," one cadet shouted. "Too tall for her own good." "Those eyes give me the creeps," another chimed in. George's jaw clenched. He'd seen this before, the casual cruelty some species directed at others they deemed less attractive. Without hesitation, he strode forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. "That's enough," he barked, his voice carrying the weight of his rank. "Back to your quarters now." The group dispersed, muttering under their breath. George turned to the Hazari cadet, who stood a full head taller than him. Up close, he noticed the intricate patterns on her scales, the depth in her multiple eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening. Yes," she replied, her voice surprisingly melodic. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm Ava." George found himself captivated by her alien features, not repulsed as the others had been. There was a grace to her movements, an intelligence in her eyes that spoke volumes. "George Howard," he introduced himself. "I'm sorry about that. Some people—" A blaring alarm cut him off mid-sentence. Red lights flashed throughout the corridor as a voice boomed over the intercom. "Attention, all personnel. Earth's defensive perimeter has been breached by hostile forces. This is not a drill. All cadets report to deployment stations immediately." George's training kicked in. "We need to move," he said, already jogging towards the nearest deployment bay. To his surprise, Ava kept pace easily. "I'm assigned to Squadron 7, she said, her long strides matching his quick ones. "Same here," George replied, a mix of relief and anticipation flooding through him. They reached the bay, joining a throng of cadets suiting up and boarding transports. As they strapped into their seats, George couldn't help but notice the worried glances thrown Ava's way. He felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. "Ever been in combat before?" he asked, trying to distract her. Ava shook her head. "Only simulations, but I've studied advanced alien weaponry extensively." George nodded, impressed. "Stick close to me. We'll watch each other's backs." The transport lurched, catapulting them into Earth's atmosphere. Through the viewport, George saw the flashes of energy weapons, the dark shapes of enemy ships swarming their planet. As they plummeted towards the battle, George realized this was more than just another fight. It was humanity's struggle for survival, and beside him sat an alien he felt compelled to protect. In that moment, as chaos erupted around them, George knew his world had irrevocably changed. The lines between species, between what he once considered attractive or foreign, blurred. All that mattered now was the person beside him, ready to face whatever came next. The transport doors hissed open, revealing a war-torn landscape. George and Ava exchanged a final look before charging into the fray, an unlikely pair united against a common enemy, their story just beginning to unfold. The acrid smell of burning metal and ozone filled the air as George and Ava emerged from the transport, weapons at the ready. Chaos erupted around them as energy blasts lit up the sky and the ground shook with explosions. They moved in sync, covering each other as they advanced through the battlefield. Hours blurred into days as they fought side by side, their bond growing stronger with each shared moment of danger and triumph. When the immediate threat to Earth was finally contained, they found themselves reassigned to a new mission, one that would take them far beyond the familiar confines of their home planet. The USS Valor hummed with activity as George and Ava made their way to the briefing room. The ship's sleek corridors were a testament to humanity's technological advancements, a fusion of Earth ingenuity and alien influences. As they entered, they were greeted by the stern face of Colonel Marcus Steele, a battle-hardened veteran known for his tactical brilliance. "Sergeant Howard, Cadet Ava," Steele nodded, his voice gravelly. "Take a seat. We have a situation." The holographic display flickered to life, showing a star system unfamiliar to George, but which caused Ava to stiffen beside him. "The Hazari homeworld," she whispered, her multiple eyes widening. Steele continued, "We've identified the hostile force as the Krelthax. They've already decimated several outer colonies, and now they've set their sights on the Hazari system. Our mission is to defend it at all costs." As the colonel detailed the gravity of the situation, George felt a mix of anticipation and concern. He glanced at Ava, noting the grit in her alien features. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In the days that followed, George and Ava spent countless hours in the ship's training simulations. The USS Valor's advanced technology allowed them to practice various combat scenarios, honing their skills and developing strategies to counter the Krelthax threat. "Watch your left flank," George called out as he and Ava maneuvered through a virtual cityscape. Ava responded instantly, her reflexes lightning fast as she took out a simulated enemy. "Nice shot," George grinned, admiring her precision. Ava's scales shimmered with a mix of exertion and what George had come to recognize as pleasure. "I had a good teacher," she replied, her melodic voice tinged with warmth. As they exited the simulation chamber, they found themselves face to face with a group of crew members. One of them, a burly technician, sneered at Ava. "Fraternizing with the lizard, Sergeant?" he spat. George felt his anger rise, but Ava placed a calming hand on his arm. Her touch sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the growing attraction between them. "Our focus is on the mission," Ava stated calmly, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "Perhaps you should do the same." The group dispersed, muttering, but the incident left a sour taste in George's mouth. He realized their relationship, whatever it was becoming, would face challenges beyond the battlefield. As they approached the Hazari system, tension aboard the USS Valor reached a fever pitch. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel to a scene of devastation. The Krelthax fleet had already begun its assault, their dark ships swarming around the Hazari's crystalline vessels. "Battle stations!" Colonel Steele's voice boomed over the intercom. George and Ava raced to their assigned posts in the weapons control room. They worked in perfect synchronization, their training paying off as they coordinated the ship's defensive and offensive systems. The space around them lit up with energy blasts and explosions. George's hands flew over the controls, targeting enemy vessels with pinpoint accuracy. Beside him, Ava's multiple eyes darted between screens, anticipating threats and adjusting shields. "Krelthax cruiser at 2 o'clock, Ava called out. George swiveled the main cannon, unleashing a barrage that tore through the enemy ship's hull. "Got it!" Their coordinated efforts proved crucial, as one by one, Krelthax ships burst into silent flames. But the battle was just the beginning. A violent shudder ran through the USS Valor, nearly throwing them from their seats. Red warning lights flashed as the ship's AI announced, "Hull breach detected. Enemy boarding party incoming." George and Ava exchanged a quick glance before grabbing their personal weapons. They moved swiftly through the ship's corridors, the sound of battle growing louder. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with the first wave of Krelthax boarders. The aliens were nightmarish to behold, their exoskeletons gleaming wickedly under the ship's emergency lighting. George opened fire, his plasma rifle cutting through the first line of attackers. Ava moved with fluid grace, her own weapon dropping enemies with unerring accuracy. They fought back to back, moving as one through the ship's halls. In a brief lull between skirmishes, George found himself pressed close to Ava in a narrow maintenance shaft. The heat of battle, the adrenaline coursing through their veins, and the undeniable attraction between them culminated in a moment of passion. Their eyes met, and without a word, they came together in a fierce embrace. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching Krelthax. They broke apart, breathing heavily, a new understanding between them. "We're not done here," Ava said, her voice husky. George nodded, a smile tugging at his lips despite the danger. "Not by a long shot." As they prepared to re-enter the fray, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Colonel Steele's voice cut through the chaos. "Attention all personnel. We've received a distress call from the Hazari capital city. Sergeant Howard, Cadet Ava, report to the hangar bay immediately for emergency deployment. George and Ava shared a look of persistence as they made their way to the hangar. Whatever challenges lay ahead on the Hazari homeworld, they would face them together. The hangar bay was a flurry of activity as George and Ava sprinted towards their assigned dropship. Technicians and crew members rushed to prepare the vessel for immediate deployment, their movements precise and urgent. "What's the situation on the ground?" George asked as they climbed aboard, strapping themselves into the acceleration harnesses. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of the Hazari capital city. Red indicators swarmed across the landscape, representing the advancing Krelthax forces. "Not good," replied Lieutenant Chen, the dropship's pilot. "The Krelthax have breached the outer defenses. We're heading straight for the city center." The ship's engines roared to life, and George felt the familiar lurch in his stomach as they launched from the USS Valor. Through the viewport, he watched the battle raging in space, energy weapons crisscrossing the void between human and Krelthax vessels. Ava's hand found his, her scales cool against his skin. "We'll make it," she said, her multiple eyes fixed on the approaching planet surface. The dropship plunged through the atmosphere, buffeted by turbulence and the shock waves of nearby explosions. George tightened his grip on his weapon, heart pounding as they neared their destination. With a bone-jarring thud, the ship touched down in what was once a bustling city square. Now it was a battleground, the air filled with the acrid smell of burning buildings and the sharp tang of ozone from energy weapons. "Move out!" George shouted as the bay doors hissed open. They emerged into chaos. Krelthax soldiers swarmed the streets, their chitinous forms a stark contrast to the crystalline architecture of the Hazari city. George and Ava led their strike team forward, plasma rifles spitting deadly energy bolts at the enemy. "We need to reach the underground complex," Ava called out over the din of battle. "The artifact is our primary objective." They fought their way through the city, each block a grueling struggle against the relentless Krelthax assault. George marveled at Ava's grace in combat, her alien physiology allowing her to move with fluid precision through the wreckage-strewn streets. After what felt like hours of intense fighting, they reached the entrance to the underground complex. The massive doors, hewn from a single piece of translucent crystal, stood partially open. "Looks like the Krelthax beat us here," George observed grimly. They descended into the complex, the crystalline walls pulsing with a soft, bioluminescent glow. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper, the sounds of battle above fading to a distant rumble. The team moved cautiously through a labyrinth of tunnels, encountering small groups of Krelthax soldiers along the way. Each skirmish was brief but intense, with George and Ava working in perfect synchronization to neutralize the threats. As they approached a junction in the tunnels, a Krelthax soldier leapt from the shadows, energy blade humming. George reacted instantly, tackling Ava out of harm's way. The blade sizzled past, missing them by inches. Ava rolled to her feet, her weapon already raised. With 3 rapid shots, she dropped the Krelthax attacker. "Thanks," George said, breathing heavily. Ava helped him up, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "We watch each other's backs, remember?" They pressed on, the tunnels widening as they neared their objective. Suddenly, the passageway opened into a vast chamber that took their breath away. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, supported by massive crystal columns. In the center of the chamber stood a pulsating structure, its facets emitting an eerie blue glow that bathed the entire space in otherworldly light. "The artifact," Ava whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. As they approached the towering crystalline structure, the air itself seemed to thicken with tension. George felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, an instinctive warning that something was very wrong. His instincts proved correct as a barrage of energy blasts suddenly erupted from the shadows surrounding the artifact. The strike team scattered for cover as a large Krelthax force emerged, led by a towering figure whose armor gleamed with an ominous sheen. "Commander Zix," Ava hissed, recognizing the notorious war criminal. The Krelthax commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. "You're too late, humans," he growled in heavily accented standard. "The artifact is ours, and soon your minds will belong to the Krelthax Empire." George and Ava shared a quick glance, a silent understanding passing between them. As one, they leapt into action, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of energy blasts and hand-to-hand combat. George and Ava moved as if they were extensions of each other, covering blind spots and creating openings for devastating counterattacks. In the midst of the chaos, George spotted Commander Zix attempting to activate the artifact. He sprinted towards the Krelthax leader, dodging enemy fire and leaping over fallen debris. "Ava!" he shouted, gesturing towards Zix. She understood immediately, providing covering fire as George closed in on the commander. Just as Zix's clawed hand reached for the artifact's control panel, George tackled him, sending them both crashing to the ground. The two grappled fiercely, rolling dangerously close to the pulsating artifact. George felt the alien's superior strength threatening to overwhelm him, but he refused to yield. Suddenly, a searing pain lanced through his side. Zix had managed to draw a hidden blade, scoring a deep cut across George's ribs. He gasped, his grip weakening. Ava's voice cut through the haze of pain. "George!" He looked up to see her racing towards him, her face a mask of drive and fear. In that moment, their eyes locked, and George felt a surge of strength born from their connection. With a roar of defiance, he twisted, using Zix's own momentum against him. The Krelthax commander stumbled off balance directly into Ava's line of fire. 3 precise shots from her weapon, and Commander Zix collapsed, his armor smoking from the direct hits. George struggled to his feet, clutching his wounded side. Ava was there in an instant, supporting him. "We need to destroy the artifact," she said urgently, her eyes darting between George's injury and the looming crystal structure. Before they could act, however, a violent tremor shook the chamber. Cracks began to spiderweb across the artifact's surface, and the blue glow intensified to a blinding radiance. "It's overloading," Ava shouted. "We need to get out of here now." Supporting each other, they ran for the exit as the chamber began to collapse around them. The rest of their team had already retreated, leaving them to navigate the crumbling tunnels alone. As they raced through the collapsing complex, George felt his strength ebbing. The wound in his side burned with each step, and his vision began to blur. "Stay with me, George," Ava urged, her voice tight with worry. "We're almost there." The tunnel behind them collapsed with a deafening roar, clouds of crystalline dust billowing around them. They could see daylight ahead, a small opening that promised safety. With one final burst of effort, they leapt through the opening, tumbling onto the war-torn streets of the Hazari capital. Behind them, the ground shuddered as the underground complex imploded, taking the artifact with it. George lay on his back, gasping for air, the adrenaline of their escape fading to be replaced by the sharp pain of his injury. Ava knelt beside him, her multiple eyes scanning him with concern. "You're hurt," she said, her melodic voice filled with worry. George managed a weak smile. "It's not that bad," he lied, wincing as he tried to sit up. Ava helped him to a more comfortable position, her touch gentle yet firm. As she tended to his wound with their limited medical supplies, George became acutely aware of how close she was, of the way her scales shimmered in the dim light of the burning city. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos of the battle faded away. George reached up, his hand caressing the side of Ava's face. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," George replied softly. The moment was interrupted by the crackle of their comms unit. Colonel Steele's voice cut through, tense and urgent. "Sergeant Howard, Cadet Ava, do you copy? We have a situation. The Krelthax fleet is pulling back, but we've intercepted transmissions indicating this was just a diversion. Their main force is en route to Earth, and they have another artifact, more powerful than the one you just destroyed." George and Ava exchanged a look of purpose. Their victory here was just the beginning. Earth needed them now, and they would face this new threat together. "We copy, Colonel," George responded, his voice steady despite his injury. "What are our orders?" As they awaited their next mission, George realized that his world had indeed changed forever. The lines between human and alien, between duty and personal feelings, had blurred beyond recognition. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that with Ava by his side, they could face anything the universe threw at them. The battle for Earth and the future of both their peoples was about to begin. The battle for Earth and the future of both their peoples was about to unfold on an unprecedented scale. "Understood, Colonel," George replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "We're ready for immediate extraction and deployment." Within minutes, a rescue shuttle touched down nearby, its engines whining as it hovered above the rubble-strewn street. George and Ava boarded quickly, joined by the remnants of their strike team. As the shuttle lifted off, they caught a final glimpse of the Hazari capital, its once majestic skyline now marred by smoke and destruction. The journey back to the USS Valor was tense and silent. George winced as a medic tended to his injury, applying a regenerative gel that tingled as it sealed the wound. Ava sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture of comfort and connection that spoke volumes. As they docked with the Valor, Colonel Steele's voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands, prepare for immediate departure. Set course for Earth, maximum speed." The massive ship shuddered as its engines engaged, accelerating rapidly away from the Hazari homeworld. George and Ava made their way to the bridge where Steele awaited them, his face grim. "We've got a long journey ahead," Steele said, gesturing to a holographic display of their route. "The Krellthax have a significant head start, but the Valor is faster. We'll catch up to them before they reach Earth." Over the next few days, as the Valor hurtled through space, George and Ava found themselves drawn to each other during their off-duty hours. They spent time in the ship's recreational areas, talking, laughing, and sharing stories of their vastly different upbringings. One evening, they stood together in the observation deck, gazing out at the star-streaked void of faster-than-light travel. George turned to Ava, struck by how the starlight played across her scales. "I never thought I'd find myself here," he said softly, "fighting alongside an alien race, racing across the galaxy to save Earth." Ava's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture George had come to recognize as amusement. "And I never imagined I'd be so drawn to a human," she replied, her voice a melodic hum. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining despite their physiological differences. As they leaned closer, the ship's alarm blared, shattering the moment. "All hands to battle stations," Colonel Steele's voice boomed. "We've entered the Sol system, and the Krellthax fleet has engaged Earth's defenses." George and Ava sprinted to their assigned posts, adrenaline surging through their veins. They arrived at the Weapons Control Center, where a bank of holographic displays showed the chaos unfolding around Earth. The Krellthax fleet, a swarm of angular, chitinous ships, had already breached the outer defense perimeter. Earth's forces, a mix of sleek human vessels and crystalline Hazari craft, fought valiantly but were clearly outnumbered. As the USS Valor plunged into the fray, George and Ava worked in perfect synchronization, operating the ship's advanced weapon systems. Their fingers danced across the controls, targeting enemy vessels with pinpoint accuracy. "Krellthax cruiser, 9 o'clock, Ava called out. George swiveled the main cannon, unleashing a devastating barrage that tore through the enemy ship's hull. It exploded in a brilliant flash, debris scattering across the battlefield. For hours they fought tirelessly, their coordinated efforts proving crucial in turning the tide of the battle. The Valor's powerful weapons, guided by George and Ava's expertise, cut swathes through the Krellthax formations. As the immediate threat to the Valor subsided, Colonel Steele's voice came through their comms. "New intelligence just in. The Krellthax flagship has been identified, and it's carrying the mind control artifact. It's making a push for Earth's atmosphere." George's mind raced. He knew they couldn't let that ship reach its destination. An idea formed, dangerous but potentially game-changing. "Colonel," he said, his voice firm with conviction, "I have a plan. We need to board that flagship and neutralize the artifact directly." There was a moment of silence before Steele responded. "That's a hell of a risk, Sergeant. But you're right. It might be our best shot. Assemble your team. You have a go." George turned to Ava, seeing the same mix of fear and perseverance in her eyes that he felt. "You with me?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Ava nodded, her scales shimmering with anticipation. Always. They quickly gathered a small strike team, briefing them on the perilous mission ahead. Within minutes, they were aboard a cloaked shuttle, slipping past the chaotic space battle towards the looming form of the Krelthax flagship. As they approached, the true scale of the alien vessel became apparent. It dwarfed even the largest human ships, its surface a maze of jagged protrusions and pulsating organic technology. There, Ava pointed, her keen eyes spotting a vulnerability. A maintenance hatch, unshielded. George guided the shuttle in close, using the battle around them as cover. With a soft thud and a hiss of equalizing pressure, they latched onto the Krelthax ship. "Remember," George said as they prepared to breach the hull, "we're here for the artifact. In and out, fast and quiet." The team nodded, weapons at the ready. George met Ava's gaze one last time, a wordless exchange of trust and affection passing between them. Then, with a deep breath, he hit the release, and they plunged into the alien corridors of the Krelthax flagship. The interior was a nightmarish blend of organic and mechanical components. Pulsating tissues lined the walls, intertwined with conduits and circuitry. The air was thick with a musky, alien scent that made George's nose twitch. They moved swiftly but cautiously, encountering and neutralizing small groups of Krelthax soldiers along the way. Ava's knowledge of Krelthax ship layouts proved invaluable as she guided them towards the central chamber. As they neared their objective, the resistance grew fiercer. Turning a corner, they found themselves face to face with a large group of Krelthax elites, led by a towering figure whose armor gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. "Vexcor!" Ava hissed, recognizing the supreme commander of the Krelthax forces. The alien leader's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. "Humans," he growled in heavily accented standard. "Your struggle is futile. The artifact will be ours, and your minds will belong to the Krelthax Empire." With a roar, Vexcor charged, his elite guards swarming forward. The narrow corridor erupted into a chaotic melee of energy blasts and hand-to-hand combat. George and Ava fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. They covered each other's blind spots, creating openings for devastating counterattacks. The rest of the strike team formed a defensive perimeter, holding back the Krelthax reinforcements. In the midst of the fray, George saw a Krelthax soldier lunging at him from his peripheral vision. Before he could react, Ava threw herself in front of him, taking the brunt of the attack. She stumbled back, clutching her side where the enemy's energy blade had scored a deep cut. "Ava!" George cried out, his heart pounding with fear and rage. With renewed vigor, he fought his way to her side, single-handedly taking down several Krelthax warriors in the process. As he reached her, she looked up at him, her multiple eyes filled with pain but unwavering persistence. "I'm all right," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to keep moving." George nodded, helping her to her feet. Together they pushed forward, finally breaking through to the central chamber. What they saw there made them pause in awe and horror. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. In the center stood the mind control artifact, a colossal crystalline structure that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Arcs of eldritch power crackled around it, filling the air with an electric tension. And there, standing before the artifact with his clawed hands outstretched, was Vexcor. The Krelthax Supreme Commander turned to face them, his alien features twisted in a mockery of a smile. "You're too late," he snarled. "The power of the artifact is almost within my grasp. Soon all of humanity will bow before the Krelthax." George stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Not if we have anything to say about it," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. As Vexcor lunged towards them, George braced himself for the fight of his life. The fate of Earth and his future with Ava hung in the balance. Whatever the outcome, he knew this battle would change everything. Everything forever. As George readied himself for the impending clash with Vexcor, a blinding flash erupted from the artifact, momentarily disorienting everyone in the chamber. When the light faded, George blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision. He saw Vexcor sprawled on the ground, unconscious. The artifact pulsed erratically, its energy fluctuating wildly. "We need to destroy it now," Ava shouted, her voice strained with urgency. George nodded, reaching for the explosive charges on his belt. But before he could take a step, a familiar voice crackled through their comms. "Sergeant Howard? Cadet Ava? Fall back immediately." Colonel Steele's tone left no room for argument. "The Krelthax fleet is in full retreat. We've intercepted transmissions indicating a splinter group has escaped with valuable defense data. Your new mission is critical." George hesitated, glancing at the artifact. "But, sir, the weapon—" "That's an order, Sergeant," Steele cut in. "Earth's forces can handle the cleanup here. We need you for something bigger." Reluctantly, George and Ava retreated from the chamber, leaving the unconscious Vex core and the unstable artifact behind. They fought their way back to their insertion point, where their shuttle awaited. As they docked with the USS Valor, George couldn't shake the feeling that they'd left something unfinished. But one look at Ava's determined expression told him that whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. Colonel Steele met them in the hangar, his face grim. "We don't have much time. The Krelthax splinter group poses a significant threat. They've acquired data on both human and Hazari defenses. If they manage to analyze and exploit that information, both our worlds could be at risk." George straightened, pushing aside his fatigue. "What's our next move, sir?" "We're being reassigned," Steele replied, leading them through the ship's corridors. "Earth's High Command has given us a new ship for this mission, the U.S. Shadow." They entered a secure briefing room where a holographic display showcased a sleek, dark vessel, unlike anything George had seen before. "She's equipped with the latest in stealth technology," Steele explained. "We'll use her to track down this rogue faction before they can launch a new offensive." Ava studied the ship's schematics, her multiple eyes rapidly processing the information. "Where do we start our search?" Steele activated another hologram, this one showing a sprawling, asteroid-based structure. "Nix-9, a notorious black market hub. If anyone has information on our targets, we'll find them there." As the colonel outlined their mission parameters, George felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He glanced at Ava, noting the determined set of her shoulders. Despite the challenges ahead, he felt a surge of confidence. Together, they'd already accomplished the impossible. Whatever this new threat posed, they'd overcome it. The USS Shadow lived up to its name, slipping through space like a phantom. Its cloaking technology was so advanced that George could barely perceive the ship's presence, even while standing on its bridge. As they approached Nix-9, Steele briefed them on their cover. "You'll pose as a mercenary couple looking for work. Your unique pairing should draw just enough attention to make you memorable, but not suspicious." George nodded, then paused. "Couple, sir?" Steele's expression remained neutral, but there was a glint in his eye. "Is that going to be a problem, Sergeant?" George glanced at Ava, who met his gaze steadily. "No, sir," he replied, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "No problem at all." Nix-9 loomed before them, a sprawling maze of interconnected asteroids and space stations. As they docked in one of the less reputable bays, George marveled at the diverse array of alien lifeforms bustling about. He and Ava disembarked, their appearances drawing curious glances from the eclectic crowd. George's human features contrasted sharply with Ava's Hazari physiology, but they moved in perfect sync, presenting a united front. They made their way through crowded marketplaces, the air thick with the sense of exotic foods and the chatter of 100 different languages. George's hand rested casually on his concealed weapon, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Ava led them to a dimly lit cantina, her intel suggesting it was a popular spot for information brokers. As they entered, the cacophony of alien voices dimmed slightly, many patrons turning to observe the newcomers. At the bar, a tentacled creature regarded them with multiple eye stalks. "What'll it be?" it gurgled in accented standard. "Information," George replied quietly, sliding a credit chit across the bar. "We're looking for someone who knows about recent Krelthax movements." The bartender's eye stalks quivered. "Might know someone. Booth in the back. Name's Zorp. Don't say I sent you." George nodded his thanks, and he and Ava made their way to the indicated booth. A being that seemed to be composed entirely of writhing tentacles sat there, regarding them coolly. "Zorp?" Ava asked. The creature's tentacles rippled in what might have been a nod. Depends who's asking. We're looking for work, George said, keeping his voice low. Heard there might be some opportunities involving Krelthak's targets. Zorp's tentacles coiled tightly. Dangerous game, that. What makes you think you're up for it? In response, Ava placed a small, glowing crystal on the table. Zorp's entire form seemed to quiver with excitement. A genuine Hazari resonance crystal, Ava said softly. Rare, even on my homeworld. It's yours, in exchange for what you know about a Krelthak splinter group, one that recently acquired some valuable data. Zorp's tentacles danced over the crystal, almost reverently. After a moment, the alien spoke, its voice a low whisper. Verdant Prime, Zorp said. A remote jungle planet. The group you seek has established a hidden base there, led by a commander named Draktor. They're working on something big. Whispers say it's a superweapon, combining stolen human and Hazari tech. George felt a chill run down his spine. He opened his mouth to ask for more details, but a commotion at the cantina's entrance cut him off. A group of Krelthak's soldiers burst in, their weapons raised. Humans! One of them shrieked. Find them! George's hand flew to his weapon as Ava's scales rippled with combat readiness. They exchanged a quick glance, a silent plan forming between them. As chaos erupted in the cantina, George and Ava sprang into action, their training and newfound connection guiding their movements. They had the information they needed, but getting out of Nix 9 alive had just become their most pressing concern. Challenge. As chaos erupted in the cantina, George and Ava moved with practiced precision, their backs pressed together as they faced the incoming threat. Exit strategy? George muttered, his eyes scanning the room for potential escape routes. Ava's scales rippled, her natural camouflage ability activating. Kitchen, back door, follow my lead. They inched towards the kitchen, using the panicking patrons as cover. A Krelthak soldier spotted them, raising its weapon with a shriek. George reacted instantly, grabbing a nearby chair and hurling it at the alien. The impact sent the soldier crashing into its comrades, buying them precious seconds. Bursting through the kitchen doors, they encountered a startled chef with 6 arms, each wielding a different utensil. Out! Out! The chef yelled, gesturing wildly with a ladle. They didn't need to be told twice. Ava spotted the back door and they sprinted towards it, dodging around sizzling stoves and steaming pots. The door burst open as they approached, revealing 2 more Krelthak soldiers. Without breaking stride, Ava launched herself at the first, her powerful Hazari legs propelling her into a flying kick. The soldier went down hard. George engaged the second, using his close-quarters combat training to disarm and incapacitate the alien. They emerged into a narrow alley, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. We need to get back to the shadow, George panted as they ran. Ava nodded, her multiple eyes scanning their surroundings. This way. I remember a shortcut from the station schematics. They weaved through the labyrinthine corridors of Nix 9, the station's chaotic layout working to their advantage. After several tense minutes of ducking into shadowy alcoves and dodging patrols, they finally reached their docking bay. Colonel Steele's voice crackled over their comms as they approached the shadow. Status report. Mission accomplished, sir, George replied as they boarded. But our cover's blown. We need to leave now. The ship's engines hummed to life as they strapped in. Moments later, they were speeding away from Nix 9, the station's irregular silhouette shrinking behind them. Once they were safely in open space, Steele turned to them. What did you learn? Ava leaned forward, her expression grave. The Splinter Group is on Verdant Prime. They're developing a superweapon using stolen human and Hazari tech. Steele's eyes hardened. Then that's where we're headed. We can't let them complete that weapon. As the shadow entered slipspace, George and Ava prepared for their next mission. They spent hours studying the limited data available on Verdant Prime, a lush jungle world with a hostile ecosystem. Days later, they emerged from slipspace in Verdant Prime's orbit. The planet below was a swirling mass of green and blue, its surface obscured by thick cloud cover. Scans show a concentration of non-native energy signatures in this region, Steele said, highlighting an area on the holographic display. That's your insertion point, You'll have to trek through the jungle to reach the Krelthak's base. George and Ava nodded, their faces set with willpower. They boarded a stealth shuttle, the craft's sleek design barely visible even at close range. As they descended through the atmosphere, the true nature of Verdant Prime revealed itself. The jungle canopy stretched as far as the eye could see, an ocean of alien vegetation teeming with life. They landed in a small clearing, the shuttle's adaptive camouflage immediately blending it with the surrounding foliage. As the hatch opened, they were hit by a wave of humid, pungent air. George stepped out first, his boots sinking slightly into the spongy ground. He helped Ava down, their hands lingering together for a moment longer than necessary. "Stay alert," he said softly. "No telling what kind of surprises this place has in store for us." Ava nodded, her scales already shifting to match the vibrant greens and browns of the jungle. They set off, their path taking them deeper into the alien wilderness. The jungle was alive with sound and movement. Strange bird-like creatures with iridescent scales flitted between the trees. Massive flowers snapped shut as they passed, their petals lined with razor-sharp teeth. As they pushed through a particularly dense patch of vegetation, George's foot caught on something. He looked down to see a vine wrapping itself around his ankle with alarming speed. "Ava!" he called out, reaching for his combat knife. She whirled around, her eyes widening at the sight. Without hesitation, she drew her own blade and slashed at the vine. It recoiled with an audible hiss, a thick, acrid liquid oozing from the cut. "Thanks," George said, catching his breath. "Guess the plants are as dangerous as the animals here." They continued on, now hyper-aware of their surroundings. Every step was carefully placed, every rustling leaf scrutinized for potential threats. As the day wore on, the jungle's challenges mounted. They crossed a river of what appeared to be acid, using fallen logs as a makeshift bridge. A pack of six-legged predators stalked them for hours, only backing off when Ava demonstrated her superior strength by uprooting a small tree and hurling it at them. Just as the planet's twin suns began to set, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated structure, its alien architecture partially reclaimed by the jungle. "An abandoned Krelthak's outpost," Ava whispered, her eyes scanning the building. "This could be our chance to gather intel on the main base's defenses." George nodded, his hand resting on his weapon. "Let's check it out, but stay sharp. No telling what might be lurking in there." They approached the outpost cautiously, their senses on high alert. As they stepped into the shadow of the alien structure, the jungle seemed to grow quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what they might find inside. The alien structure loomed before them, its angular architecture a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the surrounding jungle. George and Ava exchanged a quick glance before stepping into the shadowy interior of the abandoned Krelthak's outpost. Their eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light, revealing a corridor lined with strange, pulsating biomechanical growths. The air was thick with the scent of decay and alien chemicals. "Stay close," George whispered, his hand hovering near his weapon. They moved silently through the facility, their footsteps muffled by the soft, spongy floor. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a holographic display, flickering weakly in the center of a large room. Ava's eyes widened as she studied the data scrolling across the screen. "George, look at this. It's a star chart. And these coordinates—" Before she could finish, their comms crackled to life. Colonel Steele's voice came through, tinged with urgency. "Shadow to ground team. We've detected a massive energy signature in the Omega Nebula. It's hidden, but it's big. Really big." George and Ava shared a look of understanding. This was it, the real Krelthak's stronghold. "Copy that, Shadow," George responded. "We've found some intel here that might be related. Transmitting now." As Ava sent the data, Steele's voice came back, his tone grim. "This confirms it. That facility in the Omega Nebula is their central hub. It's where they're developing the superweapon." "Orders, sir?" George asked, already knowing the answer. "Return to the Shadow immediately. We're going to hit them where it hurts." The journey back through the jungle was tense but uneventful, their minds focused on the mission ahead. As they boarded the stealth shuttle and broke atmosphere, the true scale of their task began to sink in. The USS Shadow decloaked as they approached, its sleek form a welcome sight after days in the alien wilderness. Once aboard, they headed straight for the bridge, where Colonel Steele was waiting. "The facility is hidden within an asteroid field in the Omega Nebula," Steele explained, bringing up a holographic display. "Our scans indicate it's significantly larger than anything we've encountered before. This is their nerve center, and we're going to take it out." George studied the display, his mind already formulating tactics. "How do we get in? They'll be expecting us after Nix 9. A smile played at the corner of Steele's mouth. "We've got an ace up our sleeve. Remember that Krelthax shuttle we captured? It's time to put it to use." The plan came together quickly. George would pilot the captured shuttle, using it to approach the facility undetected. Ava would use her expertise to bypass the security protocols, allowing them to dock as if they were a routine supply ship. As they prepared for the mission, George and Ava found a moment alone in the armory. They worked in companionable silence, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. "Ava?" George said softly, breaking the quiet. "Whatever happens in there, I've got your back." Ava's scales rippled with a warmth that had nothing to do with camouflage. "And I've got yours, George. Always." The moment was interrupted by the ship-wide announcement of their arrival in the Omega Nebula. It was time. George, Ava, and Colonel Steele boarded the Krelthax shuttle, its alien controls now familiar after days of study. As the Shadow's hangar doors opened, revealing the swirling colors of the nebula beyond, George felt a surge of persistence. He guided the shuttle out into space, weaving through the asteroid field with precision. Ahead, barely visible against the backdrop of gas and dust, loomed their target, a massive structure of interconnected asteroids and space stations. "Incoming transmission," Ava reported, her fingers dancing over the alien console. "They're requesting identification." George held his breath as Ava sent the forged credentials they had prepared. Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, a harsh, clicking voice came through the comm system. "Supply shuttle THX 1138. You are cleared for docking in Bay 7 Gamma." They had made it past the first hurdle. As George maneuvered the shuttle towards the indicated bay, the true scale of the Krelthax facility became apparent. It dwarfed anything they had encountered before, a sprawling maze of metal and stone that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The docking bay swallowed them, massive doors sealing shut behind the shuttle. As the artificial gravity engaged, George shared a determined look with his teammates. "Remember the plan," Steele said quietly as they prepared to disembark. "I'll head for the power core. You two find that superweapon data, and whatever happens, we meet back here in 2 hours." With a final nod, they stepped out into the heart of the Krelthax stronghold, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of Earth, the Hazari homeworld, and countless other species hung in the balance. Failure was not an option. With one last shared glance, they stepped out into the unknown. The mission to infiltrate the Krelthax stronghold was a blur of action, close calls, and high-stakes decisions. George and Ava worked in perfect sync, their complementary skills and unwavering trust in each other proving invaluable as they navigated the labyrinthine facility. Against adversity, they succeeded in their mission, securing the data on the superweapon and disabling the facility's defenses, allowing the USS Shadow to deliver the final blow. As the dust settled and the immediate threat passed, George and Ava found themselves thrust into a new challenge, returning to Earth as heroes. The journey back was filled with a mix of emotions, relief at their success, anticipation of seeing home again, and an undercurrent of uncertainty about how they would be received. Their concerns proved well-founded as the USS Shadow approached Earth. The ship's communication systems lit up with incoming transmissions, a cacophony of voices ranging from jubilant celebration to wary skepticism. "Looks like we're getting a mixed welcome," Colonel Steele said, his expression unreadable as he scanned the incoming messages. George and Ava stood side by side on the bridge, their hands unconsciously intertwined. Through the view screen, the blue-green orb of Earth grew larger, a sight that filled George with a complex blend of emotions. "I never thought I'd be nervous about coming home," he murmured. Ava squeezed his hand gently, her scales shifting to a soothing blue. We've faced worse than this, George. We'll get through it together. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the true scale of their reception became clear. The streets of New Washington were lined with crowds. A sea of faces turned skyward. Holographic displays projected their images across buildings, interspersed with footage from their missions. The shadow touched down in the central plaza, where a hastily constructed stage awaited them. As the ship's ramp lowered, George took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Ava stood tall beside him, her bearing regal despite the palpable tension in the air. They stepped out into the sunlight, the roar of the crowd washing over them. Cheers mingled with murmurs of curiosity and the occasional shout of disapproval. George's eyes scanned the crowd, noting the mix of human and alien faces. He spotted several other interspecies couples, their expressions a mix of hope and apprehension. A group of dignitaries approached, led by the Secretary General of the United Earth Government. The woman's face was a carefully composed mask of diplomacy as she extended her hand. "On behalf of Earth and all its allies, we thank you for your service," she said, her voice amplified for the crowd. "Your bravery in the face of the Krell-Thax threat has saved countless lives." George shook her hand firmly, acutely aware of the cameras capturing every moment. "We're honored to have served, Madam Secretary General, but we didn't do it alone. The courage and cooperation of both humans and Hazari made this victory possible." Ava stepped forward, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the sunlight. "We hope that our partnership can serve as an example of what's possible when we look beyond our differences and work together." The Secretary General nodded, a flicker of genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "Indeed, which is why we've organized this ceremony. We believe your story has the power to foster greater understanding between our peoples." As they were led to the stage, George caught snippets of conversation from the crowd. Some voices were filled with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with unmistakable hostility. He steeled himself, knowing that the real challenge was just beginning. The ceremony began with speeches from various officials, recounting the threat posed by the Krell-Thax and the pivotal role George and Ava played in averting disaster. As George listened, his mind wandered to the future. He and Ava had discussed their plans in quiet moments aboard the Shadow, but now, faced with the reality of their reception on Earth, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. When it was their turn to speak, George stepped up to the podium, Ava at his side. He looked out at the sea of faces, human and alien alike, and made a decision. This was the moment to take a stand, to show the universe that love could transcend the boundaries of species. "Today we stand before you not just as soldiers who completed a mission, but as two individuals who found something unexpected in the vast expanse of space," George began, his voice steady. "We found each other." He turned to Ava, taking her hand in his. The crowd fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unlikely pair. "Ava," George said, his voice softer but still picked up by the microphones, "you've been my partner in battle, my closest friend, and the love of my life. Will you be my partner in peace as well? Will you marry me?" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as George produced a ring from his pocket. It was a unique piece, crafted from a blend of earth metals and Hazari crystals, symbolizing the union of their two worlds. Ava's scales rippled with emotion, shifting through a kaleidoscope of colors before settling on a deep, joyous purple. "Yes, George," she said, her voice clear and strong. 1,000 times. Yes. As George slipped the ring onto Ava's finger, adapted to fit her unique anatomy, the crowd erupted. Cheers and applause thundered across the plaza, drowning out the few remaining voices of dissent. Their kiss, broadcast on screens across Earth and the Hazari homeworld, became an instant symbol of unity and hope. In that moment, as they held each other close, George and Ava knew that their journey was just the beginning. They had won a great victory against the Krell-Thax, but now they faced a new challenge, building bridges between their peoples and forging a future where love knew no boundaries. As they turned to face the cheering crowd, hand in hand, they were ready to embrace their new role as ambassadors of peace and understanding. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but together, they were ready to face whatever the universe had in store for them.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.